Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. Jesus said that the Great Tribulation begins when we see the abomination of desolation as spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And for those of us who are Catholic, the abomination of desolation is when the daily sacrifice is taken away from the prince. And Daniel explains what he means by this in his chapter 10, verse number 3, where he says, "I ate no desirable bread, and neither flesh nor wine entered into my mouth." Obviously, he is referring to the Holy Eucharist. By the way, please do not listen to the false prophets who say he is referring to some kind of revived animal sacrifice by the Jews in Jerusalem at some kind of rebuilt Jewish temple. That is all nonsense. That is a false interpretation of Daniel. Those people do not know how Daniel sealed up his prophecy. The prince, of course, from whom the daily sacrifice is taken away, would be Jesus. And the one who takes away the daily sacrifice would be the false prophet. And Daniel refers to him when he says, "Neither was I anointed with oil." The false prophet will be a false pope or anti-pope. That is one who is not truly anointed with oil. And the question I am going to ask on this program is, will this occur in the spring of 2014? Right now, there is a great deal of speculation that Pope Francis may be the false prophet. There is no doubt heaven was exceedingly angry when Pope Benedict was forced to resign. And that's why God hit the Vatican with lightning at exactly 5:55 p.m. on the day that he resigned. On the other hand, Pope Francis may turn out to be Petrus Romanus, the good pope of the end times, who St. Malachi prophesied will nourish his sheep during the Great Tribulation. And now I am going to suggest someone else who may be the false prophet, and that would be Cardinal Walter Kasper of Germany. And I want to show you why he may be the one who is going to take away the daily sacrifice from the prince in the spring of next year. Let me read this article about his recent activities. Cardinal Walter Kasper says church will soon give communion to divorced, remarried Catholics. Now, this article is from the LifeSite News website, and it's by Hillary White. And she writes, "Despite a recent strongly worded clarification from Rome, confusion is continuing to be stirred up over the Catholic Church's practice of refusing communion to those who are divorced and remarried. Cardinal Walter Kasper has said bluntly and in direct opposition to the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith that the rules will shortly be changed to allow divorced and remarried Catholics to be admitted to Holy Communion. Cardinal Kasper said, Christians who want to live by faith with the Church, who acknowledge that they have made mistakes by breaking of the first marriage, which they also regret, for them it should be a way back to fully participate in Christian and ecclesial life." But Cardinal Kasper, didn't Jesus say whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery? This is against the rules of the Church and always will be. In November, during a talk at the University of Munster, Kasper followed up on the theme saying, "Turning someone away from the communion rail, one doesn't do that." Well, first of all, Cardinal Kasper, what communion rail are you talking about? All the bishops, to my knowledge, have eliminated the communion rail from Catholic churches. And Jesus did turn people away from communion. At the very first Lord's Supper, he did not give the Eucharist to the traitor Judas. And this article continues. The controversy was rekindled in October this year when the Archdiocese of Freiburg released a document laying out plans to allow divorced and remarried Catholics to receive Holy Communion if they promised to enter a new moral responsibility with their new spouse. Now, where is that in the Bible? In response, Archbishop Gerhard Müller, prefect of the CDF, published an article in the Vatican's newspaper saying that the practice of withholding communion from those in a state of mortal sin would remain in place. This was followed by a letter to the German bishops ordering them to revisit their draft document. The German bishops responded to this with more defiance, with Bishop Gebhard Fürst of Stuttgart saying in November they had voted to adopt the guidelines and expected them to be approved at their next plenary meeting in March of 2014. Please make a note of that date. As I said, there is biblical precedence for refusing communion to those who are in a state of mortal sin. And Jesus established that precedence himself at the Last Supper, when he sent Judas away before he consecrated the bread and wine into his own body and blood. Now, I admit, even within the church, there is some contention. For example, Pope Benedict believed that Judas did receive communion. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, they also said the same thing. However, on this program, I am going to prove to you that when you compare all four Gospels, it is clear that Jesus denied the sacrament to the traitor Judas. Let's take a look at all four Gospel accounts of the Lord's Last Supper. Now, I have made a chart which shows 7 key activities of the Last Supper leading up to the institution of the Eucharist. And they are all found, or sometimes not found, in the four Gospels of Matthew chapter 26, Mark chapter 14, Luke chapter 22, and John chapter 13. And they are all in harmony with each other, with one exception. And that's very interesting, but St. Luke puts the institution of the Eucharist before Judas leaves the Last Supper. And that is what I believe has led to some of the confusion. Now, I believe there are several reasons why Luke does this. First of all, Luke was not present at the Last Supper. He is not an eyewitness, unlike John or Matthew, who were present. And in fact, I believe the most perfect chronological account is given by John. He not only was present, but he was sitting next to our Lord, and he undoubtedly heard every word that Jesus spoke. So let's review these 7 key events. Jesus reclines to eat the Passover. We find that in Matthew chapter 26, verse 20, Mark chapter 14, verse 17, Luke chapter 22, verse 14. Some translations say that Jesus sat at the table. Some say recline. Probably recline is better for the Passover service. When the supper is done, Satan enters Judas. Notice here, the supper is over with. And we find this only in John chapter 13, verse number 2. But as I say, I believe John is the most accurate as far as this chronology goes. Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Again, this is only found in John. It undoubtedly happened. But for some reason or other, The other three gospel accounts leave this out. Next of these key events, Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." And he is quite upset when he says this. The disciples start looking at each other, saying, "Is it me? Who is it?" And we find this question in all four Gospels. Verse 21 of Matthew, verse 18 of Mark, verse 21 of Luke, and verse 21 of John. So far, all these events are in perfect harmony with one another. Then Jesus says, "He who dips bread with me is the one." And this is found in Matthew 23, Mark 20, and John 26. Now it's interesting that this dipping of bread cannot be the Eucharist. First of all, Jesus would not dip the Eucharist into some kind of a sauce. Not only that, but it is described as a morsel. This is part of the Passover ritual, even though the supper is done. And then Jesus says to Judas, "What you do, do quickly." And in one of the passages, it says that he leaves immediately. And this is found in Matthew 20, verse 25, and in John, verse 27. And it is only after Judas leaves the sacred banquet that Jesus institutes the Eucharist. And this is found in Matthew 26 and verse 22 of Mark. And as I say, Luke's description is out of place. It should not be before verse 21, and I have placed it here in its correct location. And so we see that all four gospel accounts, with one minor exception, are in total harmony with one another, especially the two eyewitness accounts of Matthew and John. And so, my warning to you, Cardinal Walter Casper, yes indeed, you must refuse communion to those who are in a state of mortal sin, just as Jesus sent Judas away from the Lord's table. And now I am going to make an even more serious charge against Cardinal Casper and the German bishops. I do not believe Jesus will enter into a Eucharist if the intention of the priest is to give the body and blood of Christ to anyone and everyone. Jesus said, "Do not give that which is holy to the dogs." If the Eucharist can be given to those living in mortal sin, that makes three other sacraments superfluous. You could give Holy Communion to 3- and 4-year-old children. You don't need baptism. If you can receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin, you don't need confession. And in fact, you don't need holy matrimony. People who are living in fornication could approach the communion rail. There are 3 requirements for a valid Eucharist. First, the matter must be the same as Jesus used. That is, bread and wine. You cannot consecrate strawberry shortcake. Second, you must use the words that Jesus used. You cannot say, "This might be my body," or "This is a symbol of my blood." And third, your intention must be the same as that of Jesus. You cannot intend to cast your pearls before swine. I am warning you, Cardinal Casper, what St. Paul said. "Therefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord." That means, Cardinal Casper and you German bishops, if you allow this abomination, you will be guilty of the body and the blood of our Lord. Pope Francis cannot allow this abomination. This will be the taking away of the daily sacrifice from the prince, as prophesied by Daniel. But if Pope Francis allows this abomination, it will undoubtedly spread throughout the Church, and even into the Protestant denominations. They will all be forced to practice open communion. And that will be a sure sign that Pope Francis is the false prophet, and that we, as Catholics, must flee our churches. And Jesus said, "Pray that your flight be not in winter." It's interesting that the German bishops and Cardinal Casper will be making this decision in March of next year. Will they plan to implement their decision during Holy Week? Will that be the start of the Great Tribulation?